Hello everybody and welcome back to LMM, and if you're enjoying what you're seeing on the channel at the moment, how about giving this video a like and maybe subscribing to help the channel grow. Now, we're all aware that a long time ago railways crisscrossed all over the country, and every town and large village would have its own railway station, and every business or industry would have at the very least a siding, maybe a yard, and maybe even a fleet of its own locomotives. So places like this, the docks in Ipswich, would have been a hive of activity, with wagons being marshalled around by a fleet of locomotives like the J70, feeding all the different businesses. And today, well, times have quite obviously changed, and the railways, well, they have disappeared without a trace. And when I say without a trace, well, here in part of the still working part of the docks, where factories make these brand new pleasure cruiser craft, there is still an expansive amount of the railway able to be seen, including this section where I am now, which still has the run round loop where a train would have been able to trundle along here, the locomotive detach, run round to be able to do its return working back there. There are points that come off into some of the warehouses, and it gives you an idea of just how expansive and how busy this dock would have been at its peak. For added complexity as well, there is a third rail just here on which the cranes that frame up behind me would have been able to traverse up and along the dock front here to offload and reload freight carrying vessels, when this was a working docks rather than a marina. The complexity of it continues in a that way directions. There's crossovers and more points. It's really quite interesting. Obviously, buildings have now been put in place, so the whole thing doesn't really connect up anymore, but it gives a good idea of what it once was. It's absolutely fascinating, particularly looking at all the points that originally would have been pulled over with a pinch bar. And then if it was wrong, the train would have just rumbled through it in an opposite direction. Obviously, it's all laid out as tramway style. It's laid into the concrete with two rails either side to try and protect the rail itself. Now, I don't know how much of this is actually preservation to keep it as a memento to how this once was, or if it's a matter of, well, it's not broke, so let's not fix it. This doesn't need resurfacing, so we'll just leave it be. It is, however, a long-held ambition of mine to one day be able to bring a locomotive back here and run it up and down this section just one last time, because I think that would be something truly incredible. And it's not just here. All over Suffolk, there are echoes of a once expansive railway network hiding in plain sight. Let me show you some of them.
The station here in Hadley hasn't seen a train since 1965, and it's an amazing thing that this is still here. It's now a private residence, and the fact this whole estate has built up around it and this thing still stands is nothing short of amazing.
Another thing that survives in Hadley is the rather obviously named Hadley Railway Walk, which is obviously the railway. You can see it here going off straight, level and wide enough, and this would have gone in a that way direction straight over to where the station was itself. You can see where the yard would have started to spread out here, because Hadley was very much the destination of this branch line. It came up to Hadley and then the trains returned down towards Colchester. Neighbouring Sudbury, however, has had its fate changed quite significantly. Now, I appreciate as forgotten railways go, Sudbury doesn't really fit the bill, because the railway is very much still here, as evident from the DMU that sat behind me in the platform. But it was never designed here to be a terminus, which is fairly evident of the layout here. The railway just runs into the platform and stops. So when the railway used to continue in that way, and when it closed in 1965, this became the end of the line, and the platform was left just long enough for a two-car DMU to pull in. The modern units don't actually fit. And what was off in a this way direction was a lot more interesting, because the railway branched off to different places. Like at Hadley, the railway track bed has now been repurposed into a pedestrian path, and crossing over the River Stour next door to the temporary Bailey Bridge that's been there for, well, decades at this point, is the old railway bridge, which has this nice little wooden thing over it, but very clearly still a railway bridge, taking the railway up in a that way direction towards Long Melton. And at Long Melton, the railway splits into two ways. You could either continue up towards Bury St Edmunds, or you could start going westwards towards Haverhill. But on the way, there is a very obvious sign that the railway was once there. Clare Station opened in 1865 and lasted for just over 100 years, closing in 1967, and it is without doubt the best preserved of all the railway artefacts on this tour. And that is due to the fact that in 1972 this area around us became part of a park, and the upkeep of the buildings fell under the council's remit. However, in 2012, due to budget cuts, the council decided they could no longer afford to keep these buildings maintained, and as a result they ended up being boarded up. It is a result of the community coming together in 2015 that the buildings behind me are presented in the condition that they are, which goes to show that the railway is just as important and at the heart of the community as it was 100 years ago. Excluding the obvious platforms and station buildings, the signs of the railway here are obvious. Behind me you can see the track bed stretching off in a that way direction, and there is the rather obvious goods shed over behind us, complete with a crane and a little bit of railway. The other line that went away from Long Melford went up to Bury St Edmunds, and on the far side of the town is this, part of the remnants of the Thetford to Bury St Edmunds Railway, which ceased all traffic in 1960. And it's amazing that this bridge is still here and how the embankment here still dominates the landscape. It is unmistakably the remains of a railway. It's easy to see when we look at what's left of the bridge that this was just a single railway that ran across here, not double tracked, just a single branch line. On the subject of abandoned bridges, there's this, which was part of the Mid-Suffolk Light Railway, one of the few bridges that actually the line had. The interesting thing about this is on the Debenham Spur, which was never completed, and to the best of my knowledge, this bridge here, this was never fully installed, and no trains ever crossed it. The records say that the railway ended somewhere outside Debenham. It's about here. And I believe locally these are known as the Broken Arches, with the embankment going all the way over there. One of the harder things to find on this tour is this. This is what's left of Thorpe Ness Halt, which closed in 1966, although it had already closed to goods a few years earlier. The idea for this was that this served the resort town of Thorpe Ness, which was a bit over a mile in that way direction. And when the town failed to take off and develop, this also closed. The line still exists further up, because that's what serves the nuclear power plant at Sizewell. So the line still runs into Leiston, where the flasks can be offloaded and unloaded. And with that, well, that's the end of this tour, looking around some of the leftover remnants of railways in Suffolk. If you have enjoyed it, then let me know in the comments below, and we'll do a series investigating each of the branch lines and looking at a bit more into what survives, the routes, some more aerial photography and things like that. So let us know in the comments, and of course, if you live near an abandoned railway where there's something like this, share it on our Facebook page and we'll have a little gallery of all the different abandoned railways. And with that, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this little bit different adventure looking at some of the railway heritage that isn't necessarily preserved but still exists and shows us how glorious our industrial past once was. And with that, I'm disappearing home. Thanks for watching. Coming up on the screen are a couple of recommendations for other videos. I wonder when the next train is.